Chloe here is nothing but a bastard I had to raise. Ivy is my real daughter now, a real Marine, not some pretender." The words exploded across the wedding reception like a grenade. 200 guests went silent. Champagne glasses froze midair. Every eye in that elegant ballroom turned to me. My father, the man who raised me, had just publicly destroyed me at his own wedding. His arm wrapped proudly around his new stepdaughter Ivy, who stood there in her marine dress blues with a cold smile on her face. 23 years of military service, 4 combat deployments, and this is how he sees me. I stood there, military composure barely holding, watching my world collapse in front of everyone I know. The silence was deafening. The stares were burning into my skin. And Ivy? Ivy looked satisfied. But what my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was about to turn this entire room upside down. Because sometimes the people who think they know you best, know you the least. Subscribe now, if you stand against injustice and discrimination, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Here's how this nightmare began. My name is Chloe Jordan. I'm 37 years old, and I'm a Major General in the United States Marine Corps. But before I became the woman who commands over 15,000 Marines, before I earned 2 Silver Stars and a Distinguished Service Medal, I was just a little girl, desperately trying to make her daddy proud. I lost my mother when I was 8 years old. Cancer took her fast. 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. My father Cody was a former Army sergeant who never made it past E5, and I think losing my mom broke something inside him that never quite healed. Suddenly, it was just him and me in our little house in Ohio, and he had no idea how to raise a daughter alone. Dad was tough, military tough. He'd wake me up at 5:30 every morning for what he called PT, push-ups, sit-ups, running around the block. "Jordan, women don't quit," he'd say. "Your mother was the strongest person I knew, and you're gonna be just like her." But here's the thing. No matter how hard I pushed myself, no matter how much I achieved, it was never quite enough for him. I threw myself into school like it was a mission. Straight A's weren't good enough. I needed perfect scores. I studied until my eyes burned. I joined every club, played every sport, volunteered for everything. By senior year, I was valedictorian with a perfect GPA and a full scholarship to the Naval Academy. You know what my dad said when I told him? "Don't get too big for your britches, Chloe. Pride comes before a fall." That phrase haunted me my entire childhood. Every achievement, every success, every moment I should have felt proud. There was always that voice in my head telling me not to get too big for my britches. But I kept pushing. The Naval Academy was brutal, but I thrived. I graduated 3rd in my class and chose the Marine Corps because I knew it would make him proud. Finally, I thought, finally he'd see that all those years of pushing myself had paid off. 23 years I climbed those ranks. 23 years of deployments, of leading Marines in combat, of making life and death decisions in Iraq and Afghanistan. I earned every single promotion through merit, through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. I commanded battalions, then regiments, then entire divisions. 15,000 Marines looked to me for leadership, and I never let them down. The Distinguished Service Medal came after my 3rd deployment. I'd led a counterterrorism operation that saved hundreds of civilian lives. The president himself pinned it to my chest. But you know what I was thinking about during that ceremony? I was thinking about my dad, wondering if this would finally be enough. If this would finally make him proud. But it never was. Every phone call home, every visit, it was always the same lukewarm response. "That's nice, Chloe, just don't let it go to your head." Meanwhile, he'd spend hours talking about his old Army buddies, guys who never made it past sergeant, talking about them like they were war heroes while treating my accomplishments like they were no big deal. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was serving for something bigger than his approval. But deep down, that 8-year-old girl who lost her mom was still there, still trying to make Daddy proud. Then, 2 years ago, everything changed. Dad started going to the VFW more often. He'd always been a regular, but suddenly he was there every night. That's where he met Margaret Collins, a divorced woman whose husband had been killed in Afghanistan. Margaret seemed nice enough, quiet, respectful, the kind of woman who understood military life. But Margaret had a daughter. Ivy Collins, 28 years old, Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps. And from the moment my dad met Ivy, something shifted. Suddenly, every phone call was about Ivy. "You should hear Ivy's stories from her deployment," he'd say. "Real frontline stuff, not like..." He'd trail off, but I knew what he meant. "Not like my desk job." That's how he saw my career. 23 years of service reduced to a desk job. Ivy played it perfectly. She'd call my dad Pops within weeks of meeting him. She'd show up at his house in her dress blues, telling stories about her time in a combat support unit like she'd been kicking down doors in Fallujah. My dad ate it up. "Ivy doesn't need fancy titles to prove she's tough," he told me during one particularly painful phone call. "She's got that warrior spirit, you know? That authentic military bearing." I tried to connect with Ivy, I really did. When Dad first introduced us, I offered to help her with her career, maybe put in a good word with some contacts I had. You know what she said? "Thank you, ma'am, but I prefer to earn my way up through real service, not connections." The disrespect was subtle, professional, but it was there. And the stories. God, the stories never added up. She'd talk about convoy operations that happened before her deployment dates. She'd mention equipment that wasn't even used by her unit. She'd describe combat situations that sounded like they came straight out of a movie. But every time I tried to gently correct something, Dad would shut me down. "Not everyone serves in the Pentagon, Chloe," he'd say. "Some people get their hands dirty." The Pentagon? Like that's all I'd ever done. Like I hadn't led Marines through the streets of Ramadi. Like I hadn't made decisions under fire that saved lives. But in his eyes, Ivy was the real Marine, and I was just some bureaucrat in a fancy uniform. 6 months after they started dating, Dad announced he was proposing to Margaret. "I want both my Marine daughters in the wedding," he said. Both my Marine daughters. I'd been his only daughter for 37 years, and suddenly I was sharing that title with someone who barely knew him. But I said yes to being maid of honor. I said yes because I still believed that somewhere deep down, my father loved me. I still believed that maybe, just maybe, this wedding could bring us together, instead of driving us apart. I've never been more wrong about anything in my life. If you're enjoying this story and want to see how this family drama explodes into something nobody saw coming, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will shock you. Now, let me tell you about the wedding planning, and how I discovered something about Ivy that would change everything. The wedding planning should have been a warning sign. Every single decision became a battlefield, and somehow I was always on the losing side. It started with the dress code. I had planned to wear a simple navy blue dress, elegant, appropriate, nothing that would draw attention away from the bride. But 3 weeks before the wedding, Ivy made a request that should have told me everything I needed to know. "I'd like to wear my dress blues to the ceremony," she announced during one of our planning meetings. "You know, to honor the military tradition." My dad's face lit up like Christmas morning. "That's perfect, Ivy. You earned those blues. You should show them off." Then he turned to me. "Chloe, you should wear your uniform too. Both my Marine daughters in their dress blues." Here's the thing. I rarely wore my uniform to family events. 23 years of service taught me that real confidence doesn't need to announce itself. But the way he said it, the way he emphasized both my Marine daughters while looking at Ivy with such pride, I knew this wasn't really about military tradition. "I was planning to wear civilian clothes, Dad," I said quietly. "It's Margaret's Day, not a military ceremony." His face fell. "Ivy's not afraid to show her service. Maybe you could learn something from her about military pride." Military pride. From a lance corporal to a major general, the irony was so thick I could taste it. The bachelor party was even worse. Dad insisted on having it at the VFW, surrounded by all his old army buddies and some of the local veterans. I showed up for an hour, just to be supportive, and walked into Ivy holding court in the middle of the room. "So there I was," she was saying. "Convoy under fire, RPGs coming in from both sides. My squad leader was down, comms were out, and I had to take command of the whole operation. The old guys were hanging on every word, buying her drinks, patting her on the back." Classic war story, except I knew for a fact that Ivy had served in a supply unit that never left the main base. I'd done my homework after those early conversations raised red flags. That sounds intense, I said when she finished. What FOB were you operating out of? She didn't miss a beat. FOB Liberty. You probably wouldn't know it. It was a small forward operating base. FOB Liberty was shut down 2 years before her deployment. I knew because I'd been part of the closure operation. But when I tried to gently mention that timeline discrepancy, Dad cut me off. Not everyone serves in air-conditioned offices, Chloe, he said loud enough for the whole room to hear. Some people get shot at for real. The room went quiet. These were veterans. They knew exactly what rank I held, even if Dad seemed to have forgotten. But nobody said anything. They just looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. That night, I went home and did something I probably shouldn't have done. I made some calls, used some connections, asked some questions about Lance Corporal Ivy Collins. What I found made my stomach turn. Ivy wasn't just exaggerating her service record. She was under investigation by the military police. Financial irregularities in unit funds, money that had gone missing from the Marine Corps Birthday Ball Fund, from the Unit Welfare Fund, from collections for wounded warriors. Small amounts, spread out over time, but a clear pattern. And it got worse. This wasn't her first unit. She'd been transferred twice in 4 years, both times after administrative issues. Her current command was building a case for court-martial. She was what we call a problem Marine, someone who brings dishonor to the uniform. I sat in my kitchen at 2 a.m, staring at the paperwork, facing an impossible choice. Do I tell my father that his perfect stepdaughter is a thief and a liar? Do I destroy his happiness the day before his wedding? Or do I let him walk into this marriage blind? I chose silence. Not because I wanted to protect Ivy, but because I wanted to protect him. My father had been alone for so long, and Margaret seemed to make him happy. Who was I to destroy that over my own hurt feelings? But I made another decision that night. I was going to minimize my presence at this wedding. Show up, do my maid of honor duties, and leave quietly. Let them have their perfect day with their perfect military daughter. The wedding day was beautiful. Perfect weather, gorgeous venue, Margaret looked radiant. I did my job, helped her get ready, held her bouquet during the ceremony, smiled for the pictures. Ivy wore her dress blues like she'd requested. I wore the navy dress I'd originally planned. The reception started perfectly. Good food, great music, people were dancing and laughing. Dad gave a sweet speech about finding love later in life, about second chances and blended families. I actually started to relax, thinking maybe we'd get through this without any drama. I should have known better. The trouble started when Dad asked for the microphone again. I want to say something about my daughters, he announced. The DJ turned down the music. 200 guests turned their attention to the head table. I've been blessed to have 2 Marines in my family now, he began. But they're very different kinds of Marines. My stomach dropped. Ivy here represents everything I respect about military service. She's been in the trenches, she's seen combat, she's made real sacrifices. She doesn't need fancy titles or desk jobs to prove her worth. She's the real deal. The room was getting uncomfortable. I could see retired military personnel in the crowd exchanging looks. They knew who I was. They knew what I'd achieved. But my own father was about to destroy me in front of all of them. Chloe, on the other hand. He paused, and I knew what was coming would hurt. Chloe's always been about the ceremony, the titles, the politics. She's done well for herself, sure, but she's never really understood what authentic service looks like. I felt like I was drowning. 200 people staring at me, watching my father publicly diminish everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed for. But he wasn't done. I'm proud to finally have a daughter who serves with honor like Ivy, not someone who bought their way up like Chloe. Chloe's always been about titles and ceremony. Ivy knows real sacrifice. But Ivy was glowing. She had that satisfied smile I'd seen so many times before, the look of someone who just won a game nobody else knew they were playing. The breaking point wasn't anger. It wasn't rage or embarrassment. It was pure, soul-crushing sadness. This deep, profound grief for the relationship I'd always wanted, but was never going to have. I quietly excused myself from the head table. Just getting some air, I whispered to Margaret, who looked mortified. I walked as calmly as I could through that silent ballroom, past 200 guests who were still processing what they'd just witnessed, and out to the parking lot. I sat in my car for a long time, just trying to breathe, trying to figure out what to do next. That's when I saw it. My dress uniform hanging in the back seat. I always kept it in my car, just in case of emergencies or last minute. 2 silver stars on the collar. Ribbons that told the story of 23 years of service. The Distinguished Service Medal. The Bronze Star. The Purple Heart from that IED in Ramadi that left me with shrapnel scars I still carry. I stared at that uniform and made a decision that would change everything. Sometimes the truth needs to speak for itself. If you want to see what happened when I walked back into that reception, hit that subscribe button right now, because what comes next will give you chills. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose between staying quiet to keep the peace or standing up for yourself? Because I'm about to show you what happens when you choose to stand up. 20 minutes later, I walked back into that ballroom wearing my Marine Corps dress blue uniform. Full dress. 2 silver stars gleaming on my collar. Ribbons covering the left side of my chest, each one representing years of service, combat deployments, lives saved, missions completed. The room didn't just go quiet. It went dead silent. I didn't say a word. I just walked in and stood at the back of the room, hands clasped behind my back in parade rest. But something had shifted. You could feel it in the air. Suddenly, every conversation stopped. Every head turned. 200 guests were staring at me. And for the first time that night, they weren't looking at me with pity. I heard a whisper from somewhere in the crowd. Jesus Christ, that's Major General Jordan. It was Colonel Matthews, a retired Marine I'd served with in Afghanistan. He was looking at my insignia, recognizing the ribbons, understanding exactly what he was seeing, and his voice carried in that silent room. Major General Jordan, he repeated, louder this time. Holy hell. That's when I saw Ivy's face. The color drained from her cheeks like someone had pulled a plug. Her eyes went wide as she stared at the 2 silver stars on my collar, insignia that every Marine, from boot camp graduate to general officer, learns to recognize and respect. She knew. For the first time since I'd met her, Ivy Collins understood exactly who she'd been disrespecting. My father was confused. He was looking around the room, trying to figure out why everyone's attention had shifted to me. Why were people whispering and pointing? Why the mood had completely changed? That's when Admiral Thompson approached me. Retired Navy, 3 stars, a man whose reputation in counterterrorism circles was legendary. He walked across that silent ballroom with purpose, and when he reached me, he came to attention. General Jordan, he said, in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. Admiral Thompson, retired. It's an honor to meet you, ma'am. He offered his hand. Your work in counterterrorism operations saved thousands of lives. Thank you for your service. The room erupted in whispers. General Jordan? That's a general? 2 stars? Jesus, she's a major general? I shook the Admiral's hand. The honor is mine, Admiral. Thank you. More people started approaching. A retired Air Force colonel, a Navy captain, a Marine gunnery sergeant who'd served in my regiment years ago. One by one, they came to pay their respects to the 2-star general standing in the back of the room. Ma'am, you probably don't remember me, but I served under your command in Ramadi, the gunny said. You saved my squad's ass more times than I can count. General Jordan, I heard about that operation in Kandahar. Brilliant tactical work. Ma'am, my son served in your division, said you were the finest commanding officer he ever had. I watched my father's face as the realization slowly dawned on him. He was seeing retired colonels and admirals treating his daughter with the kind of reverence reserved for senior military leadership. He was hearing stories about combat operations, about lives saved, about tactical brilliance under fire. Major General? He whispered to Margaret. Chloe's a Major General? Margaret nodded, tears in her eyes. Honey, she's been trying to tell you for years. But the person I was really watching was Ivy. Her military facade was crumbling in real time. She understood the Marine Corps rank structure better than most. She had to in order to fake her way through all those stories. And she was staring at a 2-star general she'd been talking down to for 2 years. In the Marine Corps, there are only about 30 active-duty major generals at any given time. 30 people in the entire Corps who wear 2 stars. Ivy was a Lance Corporal, the equivalent of trying to explain particle physics to a Nobel Prize winner, or giving cooking tips to Gordon Ramsay. The audacity of what she'd done was hitting her like a freight train. Colonel Matthews approached my father. "Sir, I don't think you understand what you have here. Your daughter isn't just any Marine. She's one of the most respected general officers in the Corps. I served under her command in Afghanistan. She's the real deal." My father was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. But she never said. "Dad," I said quietly, speaking for the first time since I'd returned, "I've been trying to tell you for 23 years. Ivy had retreated to a corner table. She wasn't talking to anyone, wasn't telling any more war stories. She was just sitting there, staring at her hands, probably realizing that her house of cards was about to collapse. I didn't say anything to her. I didn't have to. The truth was speaking loud enough. 6 months later, my phone rang at my Pentagon office. It was Dad. "Chloe," he said, and his voice was different, smaller somehow. Can I come see you?" Ivy had been discharged from the Marine Corps 2 weeks earlier. Court-martial for financial irregularities, pattern of misconduct, false statements about her service record. Everything I'd discovered before the wedding had finally caught up to her. Dad had learned the truth about everything. The stolen money, the fake war stories, the exaggerated service record. His perfect stepdaughter had been a lie from beginning to end. He showed up at my office looking older than I'd ever seen him. Smaller. Like something inside him had been broken and was just starting to heal. "I was wrong about everything," he said simply. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I taught you to be strong. You became stronger than I ever imagined. I couldn't see it." "Why?" I asked. "Why couldn't you see it?" He struggled for words. "Because you made it look easy. You were so composed, so professional, so controlled." Ivy was loud about her service, dramatic about it. She made it seem hard. You made it seem, I don't know, effortless. It wasn't effortless, Dad. I just didn't complain about it. I know that now. 3 months after that conversation, I was at a military awards ceremony. Another commendation, this time for my work in developing new counter-terrorism protocols. Standard stuff for a general officer, but the ceremony was nice. About 100 people attended, mostly military personnel and their families. I was surprised to see Dad in the audience. He'd never come to any of my military functions before, not once in 23 years. But there he was, in his best suit, sitting in the 3rd row. When the announcer said, "Major General Chloe Jordan," my father stood up. Not just stood, came to attention like he was still that Army sergeant from 40 years ago. And he stayed standing until I reached the podium. After the ceremony, he was surrounded by his old VFW buddies who'd come with him. I watched him from across the room, and I heard him talking to them. "This is my daughter, General Chloe Jordan," he was saying to anyone who would listen. "She's a Major General in the Marine Corps, 2 stars. She served 4 combat tours, saved thousands of lives. I'm so proud of her." When I walked over to them, he put his arm around my shoulders. "Gentlemen," he said, "I'd like you to meet my daughter, General Chloe Jordan." I looked at him and smiled. A real smile, maybe the first genuine one I'd given him in years. "Thank you, Dad," I said quietly. "No," he replied. "Thank you. For everything. For serving with honor, even when I couldn't see it. For becoming the woman your mother would have been proud of. For being stronger than I ever taught you to be." My father spent 43 years of my life looking for a daughter who would make him proud. What he didn't realize was that she'd been there all along. She just wasn't the daughter he'd been expecting. But in the end, she was exactly the daughter he'd raised her to be. Strong, honorable, unbreakable. And that was enough. If this story touched you, if you believe in the power of standing up for yourself and letting your authentic achievements speak for themselves, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone finally see the real you after years of being misunderstood? Because I think we all have that moment when we realize we don't need anyone's validation to know our own worth. Thanks for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the most powerful uniform you can wear is simply the truth.